The woman who would go on to create one of the world's most influential news platforms once believed a man in Los Angeles held the keys to her eternal soul. Arianna Huffington, the sharp-minded entrepreneur who built the Huffington Post into a media empire worth hundreds of millions of dollars, spent over a decade as a devoted follower of a spiritual teacher whose control techniques were so refined that they ensnared not just her, but dozens of Hollywood's most successful actors, producers, and entertainment industry executives. What she and her fellow celebrities didn't realize was that they weren't joining a spiritual movement. They were becoming willing participants in one of the most elaborate cult operations ever devised, a system so insidious that its victims would defend their captor, even as he systematically dismantled their identities, drained their bank accounts, and turned them into instruments of his own twisted vision of divine authority. The movement of spiritual inner awareness, known simply as MSIA, presented itself to the world as a benevolent organization dedicated to helping individuals achieve spiritual enlightenment through practical mysticism and soul transcendence. Its literature spoke of ancient wisdom, karmic clearing, and the journey toward becoming a conscious participant in one's own spiritual evolution. The movement's headquarters, nestled in the affluent neighborhoods of Los Angeles, resembled more a corporate office building than a religious institution, complete with professional staff, multimedia departments, and an extensive publishing operation that churned out books, audio recordings, and seminar materials with the efficiency of a Fortune 500 company. But beneath this polished exterior lay a carefully constructed web of control mechanisms that would make even the most seasoned cult researchers pause in recognition of their sophistication. John Roger Hinkins, born Roger Delano Hinkins in the small town of Rains, Utah, in 1934, had not always been the self-proclaimed mystical traveler who would later captivate Hollywood's elite. His early life painted the picture of an ordinary man struggling with ordinary demons. A failed marriage, financial difficulties, and a series of unremarkable jobs that left him feeling invisible in a world that seemed to reward only the exceptional. The transformation began, according to his own mythology, during a kidney stone surgery in 1963, when he claimed to have experienced a spiritual awakening so profound that it fundamentally altered his consciousness and granted him access to what he called the soul realm. Former MSIA members would later recall John Roger describing this pivotal moment with theatrical precision, claiming that he had died on the operating table and returned as a vessel for what he termed the mystical traveler consciousness. This convenient narrative, crafted with the precision of a Hollywood screenplay, would become the foundation upon which he built an empire of spiritual dependency that would ensnare thousands of followers and generate millions of dollars in revenue over the course of 5 decades. The genius of John Rogers' approach lay not in the dramatic theatrics employed by other cult leaders, but in his ability to present himself as a reluctant guru, a humble vessel through which ancient wisdom flowed rather than its source. He spoke in measured tones about the burden of his calling, often telling followers that he hadn't chosen his path, but had been chosen by forces beyond his control. According to survivor accounts, he would frequently express that he sometimes wished he could be a normal person, but that the responsibility to guide souls toward their liberation was not something he could abandon. This carefully cultivated image of reluctant divinity proved irresistible to individuals already accustomed to the artificial hierarchies of the entertainment industry, where talent agents, studio executives, and publicists wielded enormous power over careers and personal lives. In John Roger, they found someone who claimed to wield power over something far more valuable than fame or fortune, the eternal destiny of their immortal souls. Arianna Huffington, then known as Arianna Stassinopoulos, first encountered John Roger in the mid-1970s during a period of personal and professional transition that left her particularly vulnerable to his recruitment techniques. The recruitment process began with what MSIA called Introduction to Soul Awareness seminars, held in rented conference rooms at upscale hotels throughout Los Angeles and other major metropolitan areas. These events were marketed not as religious gatherings, but as personal development workshops, promising attendees practical tools for achieving greater success, deeper relationships, and enhanced creativity in their professional lives. The seminars themselves were masterpieces of influence, carefully designed to create an atmosphere of exclusivity and spiritual urgency that would leave participants feeling both privileged to have been invited and desperate to learn more. John Roger would take the stage dressed in simple but expensive clothing, his manner simultaneously humble and commanding, speaking in a voice that seemed to carry the weight of cosmic authority while maintaining the conversational tone of a trusted friend sharing intimate secrets. According to documented accounts from former members, John Roger would begin by acknowledging the material success of his listeners, praising their achievements in the entertainment industry, while simultaneously suggesting that such accomplishments, however impressive they might appear to the outside world, represented only the most superficial layer of human potential. He would tell audiences that they had achieved what millions of people only dreamed of, but would then ask whether in their moments of greatest success they had not felt a strange emptiness, a sense that something essential was still missing. As the seminar progressed, John Roger would introduce concepts that seemed both profound and deliberately obscure, using terminology borrowed from various mystical traditions, but twisted to serve his own purposes. He spoke of karmic patterns that bound souls to cycles of suffering across multiple lifetimes, describing how negative actions in past incarnations created spiritual debts that could only be resolved through proper guidance and dedicated spiritual work. The beauty of this framework from a control standpoint was its unfalsifiability. Any current struggle or dissatisfaction in a person's life could be attributed to karmic baggage from previous existences, while any success or happiness was presented as evidence of spiritual progress under John Rogers' tutelage. This created a closed system of belief, where the leader could never be wrong and the follower could never be certain of their spiritual standing without constant validation from the group. Former attendees report that John Roger would explain to his audiences that the karma they carried from past lives was like invisible chains that bound them to patterns of limitation and suffering. He would suggest that while they might be successful in their current lifetime, that success was happening despite their karmic burden, not because of it. He would then paint a picture of what they could accomplish if those chains were finally broken, the peace, clarity, and unlimited creative potential that would be theirs once their souls were truly free. The seminars would conclude with John Rogers' most powerful recruitment tool, the promise of personal spiritual initiation. He would explain that while the information shared during the seminar was valuable, it represented only the beginning of a much deeper journey that could only be undertaken with proper guidance from someone who had already traversed the higher realms of consciousness. He described himself as a mystical traveler, a rare spiritual being whose consciousness could move freely between physical and spiritual dimensions, serving as a bridge between the earthly realm and the divine source of all existence. According to survivor testimonies, John Roger would tell the assembled groups that initiation was not something that could be purchased or achieved through good deeds, but was a sacred gift that could only be bestowed upon those whose souls were ready to receive it. He would claim that he didn't decide who was ready, that the spiritual hierarchy made that determination, and they communicated their decisions through him. He would suggest that some people in the room that night would be called to take this next step, while others might need to wait until future lifetimes. This masterful combination of exclusivity, spiritual urgency, and apparent humility created an irresistible trap for individuals who were accustomed to being able to purchase or achieve whatever they desired. The initiation process itself was designed to create an immediate and profound sense of spiritual dependency that would bind new members to John Roger and the organization with bonds stronger than family ties or professional obligations. Those selected for initiation, and the selection process was deliberately mysterious and seemingly arbitrary, designed to make recipients feel specially chosen by divine forces, were invited to private ceremonies held in John Rogers' personal residence, a sprawling mansion in the Hollywood Hills that had been decorated to resemble a cross between a meditation retreat and a corporate boardroom. The initiation ritual combined elements of traditional religious ceremonies with influence techniques borrowed from therapeutic practices, creating an experience that felt both ancient and modern, sacred and scientific. Former members who have spoken publicly about their experiences describe feeling welcomed into what seemed like a family they had been searching for their entire lives.
According to survivor accounts, John Roger would look directly into initiates' eyes and tell them that their souls had been waiting lifetimes for this moment, that the spiritual hierarchy had been watching their progress and had determined they were ready to begin the real work of their existence. During these ceremonies, initiates were required to make formal commitments that went far beyond simple membership in a spiritual organization. They pledged to accept John Roger as their spiritual teacher and guide, promising to follow his instructions without question and to prioritize their spiritual development above all other considerations in their lives. The language of these commitments was carefully crafted to sound like spiritual vows rather than legal contracts. But their practical effect was to create a framework of total obedience that would govern every aspect of the initiate's future decision-making process. According to documented accounts, initiates would recite commitments to place their spiritual growth above all worldly concerns, to follow the guidance they received without question, and to support the work of MSIA with their time, energy, and resources as directed by their spiritual teacher. These words, spoken in a state of heightened emotional vulnerability and spiritual euphoria, would later become chains that bound members to the organization, even when their rational minds began to recognize the true nature of their situation. The financial commitments required of new initiates were introduced gradually and presented as spiritual privileges rather than monetary obligations. Former members report that John Roger would explain that money was simply energy, and that the willingness to share one's financial resources with the spiritual community was a direct measure of one's commitment to spiritual growth and freedom from material attachment.
Survivor testimonies indicate that John Roger would tell new initiates that the universe was testing their priorities, asking whether they were more attached to money in their bank accounts or to the eternal liberation of their souls. He would suggest that the choice they made would determine the speed of their spiritual progress for lifetimes to come. Arianna Huffington, like many other wealthy initiates, found herself contributing increasingly large sums to support various MSIA projects and initiatives. These contributions began modestly, a few $100s per month for general operating expenses, but gradually escalated through a series of special appeals and exclusive opportunities that were presented as spiritual investments rather than donations. Members were invited to fund meditation retreats, spiritual research projects, and publishing ventures that would allegedly spread spiritual truth to souls around the world who were ready to receive it. The most insidious aspect of MSIA's financial structure was the way it intertwined monetary contributions with spiritual status within the organization. John Roger created a complex hierarchy of membership levels, each with its own title, privileges, and financial requirements that allowed members to literally purchase their way up the spiritual ladder while maintaining the illusion that their advancement was based on merit and spiritual development.
Those who contributed larger amounts gained access to private seminars with John Roger, personal spiritual counseling sessions, and leadership positions within the organization that came with both social prestige and the responsibility to recruit and manage other members. According to former members, John Roger would tell selected individuals that the spiritual hierarchy had informed him they were ready for greater responsibility within the community, and that their generous support had demonstrated their commitment to spiritual service. As MSIA's influence grew throughout the 1970s and 1980s, John Rogers' ability to attract high-profile followers became both a source of tremendous validation for existing members and a powerful recruitment tool for drawing in new victims. The presence of recognizable faces from television, film, and music served as social proof that the movement offered something genuinely valuable. After all, celebrities with access to the best of everything wouldn't waste their time on a fraudulent spiritual teacher, would they? This logic, while superficially reasonable, ignored the reality that celebrities are often more vulnerable to exploitation than ordinary people, not less, due to the unique stresses of fame, the isolation that comes with public recognition, and the constant uncertainty about whether relationships are based on genuine affection or opportunistic calculation.
Arianna Huffington's involvement with MSIA opened doors to an entire network of entertainment industry professionals who were seeking the same sense of meaning and spiritual connection that had initially drawn her to John Rogers' teachings. Through her social connections and public endorsements of the organization, she became an unwitting recruitment tool for bringing other high-profile individuals into John Rogers' sphere of influence. Actress Sally Kirkland, who would later become one of MSIA's most visible celebrity advocates, has spoken publicly about first learning of the organization through conversations with Huffington at Hollywood social events. In documented interviews, Kirkland described how Huffington seemed to radiate an inner peace and spiritual purpose that was compelling to observe. According to Kirkland's account, Huffington spoke about an incredible spiritual teacher who had helped her understand her life's true purpose and clear away karmic patterns that had been holding her back for lifetimes. When someone of Huffington's stature and intelligence endorsed such teachings, it naturally commanded attention and respect. The celebrity members of MSIA found themselves caught in a particularly cruel trap, where their public status made it nearly impossible to question or leave the organization without facing potential career consequences and public humiliation. John Roger was masterful at leveraging this vulnerability, making it clear to his famous followers that their spiritual progress was directly linked to their willingness to use their platforms to promote the movement's message and recruit new members from their professional networks. According to survivor accounts, John Roger would tell his celebrity followers that their success in the entertainment industry was not an accident, that the spiritual hierarchy had placed them in positions of influence so that they could help awaken other souls who were ready to begin their spiritual journey. He would suggest that every interview they gave, every public appearance they made, every conversation they had with colleagues was an opportunity to plant seeds of spiritual awareness that could change someone's life forever. This reframing of their celebrity status as a spiritual responsibility rather than a personal achievement created powerful pressure for famous MSIA members to become active promoters of the organization, even when they might have preferred to keep their spiritual practices private. The fear of disappointing their spiritual teacher, combined with the belief that their career success was dependent on their continued spiritual advancement under his guidance, made it extremely difficult for celebrity members to maintain appropriate boundaries between their public and private lives. The daily practices required of MSIA members, known as spiritual exercises, served as the primary mechanism through which John Roger maintained control over his followers' thoughts, emotions, and behaviors. These practices were presented as ancient spiritual techniques that had been used by mystics and spiritual masters throughout history to achieve higher states of consciousness and accelerate spiritual evolution. In reality, they were sophisticated conditioning tools designed to create dependency, gather intelligence, and gradually erode members' capacity for independent thought and decision-making. The meditation component of the spiritual exercises was actually quite effective at producing altered states of consciousness, creating genuine experiences of peace, clarity, and expanded awareness that seemed to validate John Rogers' claims about the reality of higher spiritual dimensions. Members would often report profound spiritual experiences during their meditation practice, visions of light, feelings of cosmic unity, encounters with spiritual beings, and moments of transcendent bliss that felt more real and meaningful than anything they had experienced in ordinary consciousness. Former members describe writing in their required daily spiritual journals about feeling John Rogers' presence strongly during meditation, experiencing what they interpreted as him working on their spiritual bodies, clearing away karmic debris, and opening new channels of divine energy. They would document feelings of love and compassion that seemed beyond anything they had ever felt from another human being, expressing gratitude for their connection to what they believed was the divine source through John Rogers' consciousness. These genuine spiritual experiences created powerful bonds between members and their teacher, making it extremely difficult for them to question his methods or motivations, even when other aspects of their involvement began to feel problematic. The meditation experiences served as evidence that John Roger possessed genuine spiritual abilities and that the MSIA path was producing real results, making members more willing to overlook financial demands, social isolation, and other warning signs. But the spiritual exercises also included requirements that served John Rogers' need for control and information rather than members' spiritual development. The detailed journaling component required members to record not only their meditation experiences and spiritual insights, but also their daily activities, emotional states, relationship conflicts, financial concerns, and any doubts or questions they might have about their spiritual path.
These journals were reviewed by senior members of the organization who reported directly to John Roger, providing him with comprehensive intelligence about each member's vulnerabilities and potential resistance to his authority. Members were told during training sessions that their spiritual journal was a sacred record of their soul's journey, and that by honestly documenting their experiences, thoughts, and feelings, they were creating a map of their spiritual progress that John Roger could use to provide them with the most effective guidance possible. The unraveling began slowly, almost imperceptibly, as individual members started to notice discrepancies between John Rogers' teachings about spiritual service and the reality of how the organization operated behind the scenes. For Arianna Huffington, former members report that the first cracks in her faith appeared when she began to question why so much of the money contributed by members seemed to flow toward John Rogers' personal lifestyle, rather than the spiritual projects and charitable works that had been used to justify the donations. The man who preached about detachment from material possessions lived in a mansion worth millions of dollars, traveled in luxury, and surrounded himself with expensive art and furnishings that seemed inconsistent with the humble spiritual teacher persona he presented to his followers. In later interviews, Huffington would describe beginning to notice that John Rogers' lifestyle was becoming increasingly lavish, while he was asking members to make greater and greater financial sacrifices for their spiritual development. According to her account, when she raised this contradiction during a private consultation, John Roger told her that the spiritual hierarchy required him to live in a certain way in order to maintain his effectiveness as a channel for divine energy. He suggested that questioning his lifestyle was evidence of spiritual jealousy and ego attachment that she needed to work on clearing. This response, typical of John Rogers' approach to handling member concerns, demonstrated one of the most insidious aspects of his control system. Any criticism or questioning of his behavior was immediately reframed as a spiritual failing on the part of the questioner, creating a closed loop of logic that made it nearly impossible for members to voice legitimate concerns without being made to feel that they were the problem. The financial devastation experienced by many MSIA members extended far beyond the direct contributions they had made to the organization, encompassing the opportunity costs of careers neglected or abandoned in favor of spiritual pursuits, relationships destroyed by the organization's demands for total loyalty, and business ventures undertaken at John Rogers' direction that served his interests rather than those of the investors. Some members reported losing their homes, their retirement savings, and their children's college funds to support various MSIA projects that were presented as spiritual investments, but functioned as personal enrichment schemes for John Roger and his inner circle.
Arianna Huffington's financial contributions to MSIA over the course of her membership reportedly totaled hundreds of thousands of dollars, money that was channeled through various organizational entities and projects that served John Rogers' personal interests as much as any legitimate spiritual mission. Like other wealthy members, she was invited to fund meditation retreats at expensive resort locations, spiritual research projects that produced little tangible output, and publishing ventures that primarily served to promote John Rogers' teachings and enhance his public profile. What happened within the walls of John Rogers' Hollywood Hills mansion and the conference rooms where MSIA held its seminars represents more than just another story of religious fraud or spiritual abuse. It reveals the sophisticated ways in which the fundamental human search for meaning and connection can be weaponized against those who seek it most earnestly. The celebrities, business leaders, and ordinary individuals who found themselves ensnared in John Rogers' web were not weak or gullible people, but rather individuals whose very strengths, their success, their spiritual seeking, their desire to make a positive difference in the world, were turned against them by someone who understood how to exploit the deepest human needs for his own benefit. In the end, the true horror of John Rogers' legacy lies not in any single act of cruelty or exploitation, but in the systematic destruction of human agency and authentic spiritual seeking that occurred under the guise of enlightenment and liberation. The individuals who trusted him with their spiritual development, their financial resources, and their life decisions were seeking something genuine and valuable, a deeper connection to meaning, purpose, and transcendence that represents the highest aspirations of human consciousness. That this sincere seeking was met with exploitation and abuse represents a profound violation of the sacred trust that should exist between spiritual teachers and their students, and serves as a reminder of the vigilance required to protect the vulnerable from those who would prey upon their deepest needs and highest hopes.